Hi everybody, welcome to our lecture for Chapter 4 in class, which is the behavioral approach to leadership. I have probably taught this concept, this chapter now for about 15 years. I was teaching it in high school classes, I was teaching it in college business classes, and now I'm teaching it in a grad education class. This is the chapter that connects to the business world and organizational behavior more than any other one. I think it's interesting. I think it's a good way of looking at leadership. And if you believe that business influences education, you're going to find correlation to this in this chapter. I believe this chapter is appropriate in education. Would I call this my leadership style? No. I would say that I am more situational and adaptive. But I value this chapter and think there's a lot of great theory involved in it, and it's really good for future superintendents. So, behavior lands with style. The style approach to leadership really says that people behave a certain way. It's focused on what a leader actually does, how they act, how they behave, and what it looks like. Behaviors are either task behaviors or relationship behaviors. And we're going to talk about each one of these. Task behaviors are things that accomplish goals, achieve objectives. These are things that go on a checklist. We have to do this today, that today, this today. Those are task behaviors. Task behaviors in a principalship. What do principals experience the most of their time with? And this was part of my dissertation. What tasks take up the most of their day? Surprisingly enough, or not surprisingly, most of it is meeting with angry parents and meeting with angry students. Paperwork gets pushed to the side, so does instructional leadership as well. What causes principals the most stress? Well, my dissertation findings, the sample I used, said it was really meeting with parents and disciplining students. What do principals have the least amount of autonomy and control over? Most of them said it was initiatives from central administration or from the state. So my dissertation looked at these from an organizational theory perspective. I wanted to see where principals were engaging the most amount of their time and what caused them the most stress and where did they feel like they had limited autonomy. Because it was things if they had high autonomy over, but the stuff they had high autonomy over didn't cause them stress, that was important. So I wanted to particularly pull from that and see if something that they had high autonomy over still caused them stress. So I went for non-urban principals. I could have done an urban sample, I could have done an urban study, but I thought that it would be easier for me to look where principals have one responsibility and they were expected to master that responsibility. In Cleveland, which is right next to me in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, they have principals that do discipline, grant writing, instructional leadership, and I wanted my dissertation to have some sort of merit and substance when I looked at it. So the main things that I looked at from 69 different respondents, I wanted to see what of 30 tasks that principals do, and I borrowed that from Elaine Horning and Jim Spallon, the tasks, I wanted to see where principals spent their time at. Number one was student discipline. Number two was meeting about students. Building walkthroughs was third, which that's good. That's a good thing to hear. Teacher evaluation cycle was fourth. Meeting with teachers for non-evaluation purposes was fifth, meetings was sixth, IEPs was seventh, supervising after school functions was 8, engaging in data-driven decision-making was 9, and dealing with the master schedule was 10. Biggest thing and the biggest takeaway message from this was the amount of time involved in student discipline was still tremendous. And I think that's important, and I think you can't get past that. So I ask you, does any of this surprise you? And if we were in the face-to-face version of the class, we would talk about this. My previous experience teaching this face-to-face has said that people were surprised that student discipline is number one. Why doesn't the assistant principal do that? Well, think about if an assistant principal if there are 11 discipline problems. The assistant principal can probably handle 9 or 10 of them, but those 1 or 2 that are so severe that could lead to the news coming, the building principal has to take responsibility over them. That's what a lot of them said in their qualitative portion of it, so I thought that made sense. So next I asked the same thing. What tasks causes stress in the position? Look at this. Number one, student discipline. So student discipline was the most time and the most stress. Number 2 was standardized testing. Number 3 was the master schedule. 4 was HR tasks. 5 was meetings. 6 was the IEP. 7 was the teacher evaluation cycle. 8 was supervising after school functions. 9 was data-driven decision-making, and 10 was designing and developing curriculum. I want to highlight this. Look up here and see right now that building walkthroughs was 3rd. And directly meeting with teachers for non-evaluative purposes was 5th. That did not cause stress for principals. So, in theory, paralleling this to our other class, if we could create a system where principals meet with teachers in non-evaluative purposes and also engage in more walkthroughs, they're going to be happier and less stressed principals. That was one of my biggest findings from my study. So, what can be done to eliminate the stress? Well, I just told you. That's the key to eliminate the stress. So then I examined the relationship between autonomy and control and stress. And here are the findings that I think will impact you as a principal. Young, inexperienced principals were bothered by not having autonomy and control over things like budgeting, facilities, and school board directives. That's something that they came into the position expecting to control and wanting to control. The older they got, and when I say older, I mean it could be older physically in age, but it could also be more experience as well. But the older they got, the less they cared about those particular issues, which I personally think is a big deal because they weren't worried about those issues anymore. So relationship behaviors are used to help subordinates feel comfortable with themselves, each other, and situations. A lot of this goes into what Glickman will tell you about in the EDLE 5473 class. Your personality and the personality of your colleagues really matters more than anything else, because if you're a good leader, you're a good principal, you can at least find things you can talk to other people about. And that's what we're hoping for, and that's really what we want to see out of this. So there are 2 major behavior studies on leadership. They came out of Ohio State and the University of Michigan. I'm going to talk about each one of them a little bit. So the Ohio State study was the Leader Behavior Description Questionnaire. Students and people were given a list of 150 different behaviors, and leaders were the subordinates were asked to basically say, does your leader engage in those behaviors? And then the leaders were basically told how they engaged in those behaviors. So, but it was difficult to say how many times leaders engaged in that many tasks. Think about this. This is 1957. You're not going to be able to measure like you would today with a journal, a cell phone, anything of the work that Jim Spallon did where he did time sampling and he paged principles. So that stuff potentially couldn't be done yet. So most of the settings were military, industry, and educational. Across each industry, there were specific behaviors that good and bad leaders possessed. I think that's important because it showed that leadership does not have to be industry specific. That's a big idea. So there were so many questions, and it was revised into a shorter version. That's the Stodgill version. This is the one that's still being used today, 50 years later. When you look up Leadership Behavior Description Questionnaire Revised, Stodgill 1963 is the one that you're going to commonly see. So leaders are involved in task and relationship behaviors, but they're looking at initiating structure and relationship behaviors. So initiating structure is how you provide work and what you do for your subordinates. This can be things like organizing work, giving structure to context, defining role responsibility, scheduling activities, organizing your PLCs, dividing up what teachers have to look at in terms of data. That can be things like structure. Leaders who are high in initiating structure are good at assigning members to particular tasks. They expect workers to maintain certain standards, and they find deadlines important. I think deadlines are important. I'm a firm believer in structure, if you can't tell that already. I think it's important that you see different perspectives, and if something's due, I think it's important that you understand when it's due and why it's due. So my question is, what do you feel are the most important responsibilities that you have to give your teachers in your building? You have to ask yourself, can you give your teachers full freedom and let them make mistakes over things? And if so, what can you do? And also you need to consider, are you the type of leader that would want this in your building where you're basically giving your teachers autonomy? Think about this for those of you that have taken EDLE 5473. Do you want your teachers to have control over things? And if so, how much control? So, the concept of consideration, this is described as the extent to which a person is likely to have job relations that are characterized by mutual trust, respect for employees' ideas, and regards for their feelings. So these are people that are friendly, personable, approachable. They can help you with your personal problems, and they can treat all employees as equals. This is great. If you as a leader can do this and show people that you care, it's fantastic. You also know, though, in looking at this, this is a very draining task for a lot of people and a lot of leaders. So you must nurture and you must support your leaders when you're needed to. So what can you do? How can you help your faculty members? Let them interact with each other and offer them incentives to go to different activities and different events. If you can do this off of school property and let them go and encourage them to go to a social after work, encourage them to, we're all going to sit together at the high school football game. It doesn't conflict with anything. So if there is a problem and somebody would show up drunk or under the influence of something, you're worried about them as a person, but you're also giving them consideration and you're helping them interact with each other and you're trying to build a relationship. So that's important. So team building activities are good, and so are social activities. Some people think some people don't. Some people think that they're just a bunch of time wasters, but if you do them correctly, it's a good idea. I advise you do team building activities at the beginning of the school year, at the end of the day, on a PD day. Leave. If it's a professional development day and you're supposed to be there from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., leave at 3, have everybody go out somewhere, have food, interact, talk, relax, or do it around the holiday. Doing it around a holiday is a great idea, because then they're going to at least feel recharged. It's a draining period. They're counting down when it's going to be time to leave. But if you do it this way, you might be able to get them invested in what's going on. So leaders that are high in initiating structure achieve high employee performance and satisfaction. One of the problems that comes into this, though, is that it leads to greater rates of grievances because people can say, well, you're playing favorites, you're picking this person over that person. That can be a problem. People are more likely to be absent, and there could be lower rates of job satisfaction for doing things that are routine and simple, and you don't want that to happen. So next we have the University of Michigan study. And this looks at production-oriented leadership behavior and employee-oriented leadership behavior. So employee-oriented leaders emphasize interpersonal relations. They get to know their people. They accept differences among their members, and they make sure that the people are doing the jobs and the tasks that are best suited for them. Production-oriented leaders are more focused on what gets done, how it gets done, and who's the one that's accomplishing it. So on page 80 of our textbook, it's the Blake and Moulton leadership grid, and this is good to look at. This is a combination of both of the studies. The conclusions from Michigan say that researchers strongly favored the leaders who were employee-oriented. They had higher group productivity, higher job satisfaction. They were happy because the people cared about them as a person. Production-oriented leaders, on the other hand, had low group productivity and lower group job satisfaction. So the leadership grid, when we look at this, this will give you the opportunity to see different types of management systems, and we're going to go over each one of them. But if you're looking at the grid, and I don't have a picture of the grid on this slide, but it's in your textbook, you can see the different domains, and we're going to talk about each one of them. So authority and compliance, really, this means that human input is little to none, and you don't give humans the opportunity to discuss what they feel. Everybody that works somewhere in an authority and compliance organization, everything is task-driven. You're not worried about how they feel as a person. You don't communicate with them. They just do tasks. You only give them instructions on how to act and how to be. It's results-driven. Your tools, your job is to attain results. Most leaders in this environment are hard-driving, demanding, controlling, and overpounding. But in some industries, this is common, and you know that you see this in some industries. When principals are the ones that are forced to do this method, I say that their foot's on them because they're normally stuck. They're under external pressures, normally from central administration. They have to be getting their scores up, they have to improve their building. They turn into micromanagers because they feel like they have to be. It's challenging for teachers because teachers want to be personal and they want to be involved in things. But this does exist in school administration, and it definitely does in your larger urban school districts. So then we have the country club style. These are people that really just want a friendly organizational aspect at work. You come in, you have a good time, everything's friendly, you're worried about creating relationships with other people. We're not focused on production, we're worried about how people feel and how people care and interact with each other. There's positive climates. People should be agreeable, they want to help each other, they should comfort each other, and it should be non-confrontational. It'd be great if all work environments were like that. The problem with it is, what happens when the jobs and the tasks don't get done? So principals that use this approach are team builders, groupthink. They're not in high-stressed environments. They can come in, they can have a good day, they can interact with their students. I know very few principals that I would say subscribe to this leadership approach. I knew one, he was in a K-1 building. In the district back home, he was the only principal for kindergarten and first grade. And every other student, they went to elementary school 2nd to 5th, and there were 4 2nd to 5th elementary schools, 1 6th to 8th middle school, and 1 high school. In the K-1 building, he had everybody. Everybody was a team, and they were focused on literacy. And he wasn't under many pressures or mandates because everybody got along and everybody knew that their job was literacy. The next approach is the impoverished approach. This is the person who, quite frankly, has turned off the job that they're doing and they're no longer feeling like principals. The leader is unconcerned with both tasks and interpersonal relationships and just biding their time. They're there to survive more than anything else. They go through the motions. They're uninvolved. They're withdrawn. They don't talk to followers that are different from what their opinions are. And they're just resigned and apathetic. They come in, they do their job, they get out, and that's the type of leader they are. I have found principals that are like this to be ones that are counting down the years to retirement. There's not much pressure on them from central administration because central administration knows that they can't change them. Because there's no pressure on them, they can be successful and they can stick to their approach, right? Because they're not getting pressure from central administration. They've not changed their buildings regularly, but they do know what needs to be done to sustain. And I think that's a big idea. These are individuals that know this is what I have to do to sustain in my position, and they're willing to do just enough to get what they need. Middle of the road are the people that have a little bit of each approach. These are the people that are dead center in the molten leadership grid. They compromise. They worry about the tasks, but they worry about the people who do the tasks and how the tasks are affecting them as people. They're conflict avoidance people. I think that's a big idea. Let's everybody get along. Let's be happy. They want to advance the organization, make sure the organization does well, but they also want to do this as smoothly as they possibly can. They'll put tasks above conflict and handle conflict when it's absolutely necessary to handle conflict. So these people just want to sustain. Most of your principals, they're worried about keeping the school at the level it's at, what it needs to be at. They want everybody to be happy and the school to perform exactly where it is. The schools are adequate. They might want to retire, but they could also be interested in just sustaining their model as well. Team leaders believe that everything should be on a teaming-based structures. Everybody should work together. They should understand the mission and vision of the district and of the building. They care about tasks and interpersonal relationships, but they care about working together to accomplish those tasks. Most leaders that operate under this facet involve a high degree of participation in teamwork. People that get along with each other and that like working in teams love these types of leaders. They have to enjoy working. The leader enjoys working, but the team is everything. I say that these are principals that truly love their job. That's a good thing. You have to keep in mind there are principals who expect you to love your job as much, though. When you have a principal that feels this way and thinks this way, that can be challenging for a teacher who may not have the whole team mentality. Wants to come in, does a good job, teaches their class, and closes the door. So you have to keep that in mind. If an apathetic teacher doesn't care about teaching, that's the other extreme, and that can be the problem as well, because in that case then, the teacher doesn't care, and there is a definite personality clash. The paternalism, maternalistic approach, to leadership. These are basically saying that we're just going to reward people for doing what they're supposed to do by being loyal and being obedient. Even though it says paternal and maternal, it's more authoritarian. It's more authoritarian, I believe. They're benevolent dictators. They want their